When my daughter Rain screamed, "I never want to see you again," and slammed the door in my face, I decided to give her exactly what she asked for. What she didn't know was that giving her space would reveal a truth that would change both our lives forever. But before I tell you about the moment that shattered everything between us, you need to understand something about mothers and daughters. We think we're protecting them, but sometimes we're actually protecting ourselves. And sometimes what looks like love from the inside looks like prison bars from the outside. My name is Dr. Valencia Mitchell, and for 52 years I thought I knew what strength looked like. I'm a pediatric surgeon in Portland, Oregon. I save children's lives for a living. I've performed heart surgery on babies smaller than my hand, made life or death decisions in seconds, and built a medical practice that other doctors respect. But none of that prepared me for the day my own daughter looked at me like I was the enemy. You want to know how you fail at the one job that matters most? You love someone so hard that you forget to let them breathe. 24 years ago, I held my daughter Rain in my arms for the first time, and I made a promise that would eventually destroy our relationship. I promised that she would never feel abandoned, never feel unsafe, never feel like she wasn't enough. What I didn't realize was that keeping that promise would require me to control everything around her, including her. Rain is everything I'm not. Where I'm practical, she's artistic. Where I plan every detail, she embraces chaos. Where I see risks, she sees possibilities. She's got this wild, curly hair that she refuses to tame, and eyes that light up when she talks about her art, in a way that used to light up when she talked about everything. Used to, before I apparently sucked the joy out of being my daughter. But here's what everyone in my family will tell you about me, and why you need to stick around for this story. They think I'm a control freak who can't let her adult daughter live her own life. My sister Juniper calls me a helicopter parent. My mother Cordelia says I'm repeating the same mistakes she made with me. And Rain? Well, Rain thinks I'm the reason she can't have normal relationships or make her own decisions. They're not entirely wrong, but they're not entirely right either. See, what nobody talks about when they're judging the overprotective mother is what made her that way. And what made me this way was a Tuesday afternoon 16 years ago when my husband Camden walked out on us like we were a temporary inconvenience instead of his family. Rain was 8 years old. 8. She came home from school excited to show her daddy a picture she'd drawn, and found me sitting at the kitchen table with divorce papers and a note that basically said he'd decided being a father was too hard, and he needed to find himself, like he was a lost tourist instead of a grown man with responsibilities. You want to know what it's like to watch your 8-year-old daughter ask why daddy doesn't love her enough to stay. You want to know what it's like to realize that the person you trusted most in the world thought so little of you that he couldn't even have the conversation before he left? It changes you. It makes you build walls so high that even the people you're trying to protect can't climb over them. So yeah, I became the mother who checked homework twice, who wanted to meet every friend, who asked too many questions and gave too much advice. I became the mother who worked extra surgeries to pay for everything Rain needed, who skipped dating so I could be available for every recital and soccer game, who planned her future because I was terrified she'd make the wrong choices and end up hurt like I was. And for years, it worked. Rain and I were a team. We had inside jokes and movie nights and conversations about everything. She told me about her crushes, her dreams, her fears. I thought we had the kind of relationship I'd never had with my own mother. Open, honest, connected. What I didn't realize was that I was raising a daughter who felt like she had to perform her life for my approval instead of living it for herself. The cracks started showing when Rain went to college. Art school, which I supported even though every practical bone in my body wanted her to choose something more stable. But I'd learned enough from my own mother's criticism to know that crushing your child's dreams in the name of practical love doesn't actually protect them. It just makes them stop sharing their dreams with you. College was supposed to be where Rain spread her wings while knowing she had a safe place to land. Instead, it became where she learned that other families don't operate like ours did. Other mothers don't text 5 times a day checking in. Other mothers don't research their daughters' professors and call with helpful suggestions about course selection. Other mothers don't show up unannounced with care packages and stay long enough to reorganize the dorm room. But here's what I was really doing, and this is important for what happens next. I wasn't just being overprotective. I was being overwhelmed. Because while Rain was at college discovering her independence, I was working 60-hour weeks to pay for that independence. I was taking extra surgeries to cover her tuition, her housing, her art supplies, her spring break trips. I was saying yes to every financial need while saying no to my own social life, my own relationships, my own future. Not because I had to, because I wanted to, because providing for her felt like love. And love was the only thing I knew how to give that felt big enough to fill the hole her father left. The real problem started her senior year, when Rain began pulling away. Shorter phone calls, fewer visits home, conversations that felt scripted instead of genuine. I told myself it was normal college senior behavior, but something in my gut knew it was more than that. Then came graduation day. I was so proud, taking pictures and planning the celebration dinner, talking about her bright future and all the possibilities ahead. But Rain seemed distant, distracted, like she was somewhere else entirely. That night, in the hotel after graduation, she told me she was moving in with her boyfriend Phoenix and wanted to take some time to figure things out before making any big career decisions. Phoenix, a guy I'd met exactly twice, who worked at a coffee shop and wrote poetry and had the kind of dreamy, impractical outlook on life that I recognized as exactly the type of person who would break my daughter's heart when reality hit. "What about your job interviews?" I asked. "What about the gallery internship we discussed?" "We never discussed it, Mom. You planned it. There's a difference." That was the first crack. The first time Rain directly challenged not just my advice, but my involvement in her life. And instead of listening to what she was really saying, that she needed space to make her own choices, I heard rejection. I heard her choosing someone else over me. I heard history repeating itself. So I did what scared mothers do when they feel their children slipping away. I held on tighter. I asked more questions about Phoenix, gave more opinions about her choices, offered more solutions to problems she hadn't asked me to solve. And with every attempt to help, I pushed her further away. But I couldn't see it then. All I could see was my daughter making choices that looked exactly like the kind of mistakes that had broken my own heart. All I could feel was the terror of watching her trust someone who might leave her the way her father had left us. The breaking point was still 3 months away, but it was building with every conversation that felt more like a negotiation than a connection. Building with every time I said, "I'm just trying to help," and she heard, "I don't trust your judgment." Building toward the day when my love would finally look so much like control that my daughter would choose to lose me rather than live with it. But what neither of us knew yet was that sometimes the only way to save a relationship is to be willing to destroy it completely. Stay with me, because what happened next will make you question everything you think you know about family, love, and what it really means to let someone go. What neither of us knew yet was that sometimes the only way to save a relationship is to be willing to destroy it completely. And the destruction started with a phone call that changed everything I thought I understood about my daughter's life. It was a Thursday morning in October. I remember because I was between surgeries, grabbing coffee in the hospital cafeteria, when my phone buzzed with a text from my sister Juniper. "You might want to check Rain's Instagram. There's something you need to see." Now, I'm not usually the type of mother who stalks her daughter's social media. Okay, that's a lie. I absolutely am that type of mother, but I try to be subtle about it. But Juniper's message had this tone that made my stomach drop, so I opened Instagram right there in the cafeteria. The photo hit me like a physical blow. Rain at some trendy Portland restaurant, laughing at a table with Phoenix and Camden, my ex-husband, the man who walked out on us 16 years ago, the man who couldn't be bothered to send birthday cards or Christmas gifts, the man who had systematically broken my daughter's heart by treating her like she didn't exist. He looked older, obviously, but still had that easy smile that had fooled me into thinking he was dependable once upon a time. And Rain, God, Rain looked happier than I'd seen her in months, genuine, unguarded happiness that I hadn't been able to give her despite all my efforts. The caption was what really destroyed me. "Family dinner with Dad and Phoenix. Sometimes the best surprises are the ones you never saw coming. #grateful, #family, #new beginnings." Family dinner with Dad, like he'd been a constant presence instead of a 16-year absence, like he'd earned the right to sit at a table with the daughter he'd abandoned. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. Around me, the hospital cafeteria continued its normal rhythm. Doctors discussing cases, nurses grabbing quick meals between shifts, the everyday flow of life-saving, but I felt like I was drowning in plain sight. I called Rain immediately. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. The third time she finally answered, but her voice had that guarded tone I'd been hearing more and more lately. "Hi, Mom. I'm kind of busy right now." "Rain, we need to talk. I saw the photo." Silence. Then, "What photo?" "Don't play dumb with me. The Instagram post from last night. You were with your father." So. The casual way she said it, like having dinner with the man who destroyed our family was no big deal, like keeping it secret from me was perfectly reasonable. "So, you didn't think to mention that you're in contact with him? You didn't think I had a right to know that the man who walked out on us is suddenly back in your life?" "It's not really your business, Mom. Not my business. My daughter reconnecting with the man who left us was not my business." The words felt like a slap. "Of course it's my business. I'm your mother. I raised you. I was there for every nightmare, every disappointment, every moment when you cried because Daddy wasn't there. And now you're having secret family dinners with him? They're not secret. I just didn't tell you because I knew you'd react exactly like this." "Like what? Like someone who cares about you? Like someone who doesn't want to see you get hurt by the same man who hurt you before?" "He didn't hurt me, Mom. You did." The line went dead. She'd hung up on me. My daughter had hung up on me to protect her relationship with the man who'd abandoned her. For the rest of that day, I was useless. I went through the motions of surgery, consultations, patient rounds, but my mind was stuck on that conversation. How had I become the villain in this story? How had Camden, who'd given nothing, somehow become the hero while I, who'd given everything, was the one she was protecting herself from? That weekend, I did something I'd never done before. I drove to Rain's apartment unannounced, not to check up on her, not to bring care packages, but to have the conversation she was clearly avoiding. Because if my daughter was going to rebuild a relationship with her father, we needed to talk about what that meant, and what that looked like, and how to protect her from getting abandoned again. I knocked on the door of the little apartment she shared with Phoenix in southeast Portland. It was one of those converted warehouse buildings that young artists love, all exposed brick and high ceilings and probably terrible heating, the kind of place I would have worried about her living in if I'd known she was living there. Phoenix answered the door, and I could immediately see in his expression that this was not a welcome surprise. "Oh, hi, Dr. Mitchell. Rain didn't mention you were coming by." "She didn't know. Is she here? We need to talk." Phoenix looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight and glancing back into the apartment. Actually, she has someone here right now." Someone. Before I could ask who, I heard a voice that I hadn't heard in 16 years, but that I would recognize anywhere. "Rain, sweetheart, what do you think about this piece? The composition really reminds me of your work from high school." Camden, in my daughter's apartment, looking at her art, talking about her high school work like he'd been there for any of it. I pushed past Phoenix before I could stop myself. I know. It was her apartment, her space, her choice about who to invite. But seeing him there, in the life I'd built for her, acting like he belonged, it was like watching someone steal something that didn't belong to them. Rain was standing next to an easel showing Camden a painting she'd been working on. They both turned when I walked in, and the look on Rain's face wasn't surprise or embarrassment. It was anger. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I could ask you the same question. I looked directly at Camden. "Hello, Camden. 16 years is a long time." He had the decency to look uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough. "Valencia, you look great. Successful. I heard about your practice." "From who? Because it certainly wasn't from you checking in on the daughter you left behind." "Mom, stop!" Rain stepped between us, and for a moment she looked exactly like she had at 8 years old, trying to mediate between parents who couldn't be in the same room without conflict. Except now she was protecting him from me instead of asking me to fix what he'd broken. "Rain, I need to talk to you, alone." "No. Whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of both of us. We're all adults here." Adults. She was calling Camden an adult, like he'd earned that designation through something other than just aging. "Fine. Camden, I want to know what you want. You haven't contacted her in 16 years. You missed birthdays, graduations, holidays, everything that mattered. You don't get to just show up now and play father. People change, Valencia. I know I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Walking out on your 8-year-old daughter isn't a mistake. It's a choice. And now you're making another choice to waltz back into her life when it's convenient for you." "That's not fair, Mom." Rain's voice was getting louder. "He's trying to make amends. He's been honest about his mistakes, and he wants to build a relationship with me now." "And what happens when building that relationship gets hard? What happens when you need him and he decides it's too much work again? What happens when you decide I need too much space and you can't handle not controlling every aspect of my life?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Camden looked between us, probably realizing he'd walked into something much bigger than a simple family reunion. "I don't control your life, Rain." "Don't you? When was the last time I made a decision that you didn't have an opinion about? When was the last time you supported something I wanted to do without trying to modify it, or improve it, or protect me from it? I protect you because I love you. You protect yourself because you're afraid I'll leave you like he did." The truth of it hit me like a physical blow, because she was right. Every piece of advice, every concerned question, every attempt to guide her away from risks, it wasn't just about protecting her. It was about making sure she never had a reason to walk away from me the way Camden had walked away from us. But I wasn't ready to admit that. Not in front of him. Not when he was standing there watching our relationship crumble, while probably feeling vindicated about whatever story he told himself about why he left. That's not true. Isn't it? You can't stand that I'm happy with Phoenix because you think he'll hurt me. You can't stand that I want to be an artist because you think it's not stable enough. And you can't stand that I want a relationship with my father because you think it means I don't appreciate everything you've done for me. Do you? Appreciate it? The question came out sharper than I meant it to, but I was bleeding and desperate and watching my daughter choose everyone else over me. I appreciate that you sacrificed for me, but I don't appreciate that you made those sacrifices my responsibility. I don't appreciate that loving you means I can't make my own choices. And I don't appreciate that you're so bitter about what happened with Dad that you can't see that maybe, just maybe, some people actually can change. Camden stepped forward. Valencia, I know this is difficult, but Rain is an adult. She gets to decide what relationship she wants in her life. That was the moment. The moment when the man who'd abandoned us presumed to lecture me about my daughter's autonomy. The moment when 16 years of single parenting, financial struggle, emotional labor, and unconditional love got reduced to being difficult. Don't! My voice was barely controlled. Don't you dare stand in the life I built for her and tell me how to be her mother. I'm not trying to. Yes, you are. You're trying to be the good guy, the changed man, the father who deserves a second chance. But you know what? Second chances are earned, not demanded, and you haven't earned anything. Rain exploded. And what have you earned, Mom? The right to control my life forever because Dad left? The right to make me feel guilty for wanting independence because you sacrificed so much? The right to make every relationship I have about your fear of being abandoned? I gave you everything. I never asked you to give me everything. I asked you to let me grow up. The silence that followed was deafening. We stood there, 3 adults in a small apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of things we'd said that couldn't be taken back. And then Rain said the words that would change everything. I'm done. I'm done with your manipulation and your need to control everything in my life because you can't control your own fears. I never want to see you again. Stay out of my life. She was crying, but her voice was steady. Final. I looked at Camden, expecting him to say something, to mediate, to help. But he just stood there, probably thinking this was exactly what he'd expected from me all along. I left without another word, because sometimes when someone tells you exactly what they think of you, the only dignity left is in not arguing. But as I walked to my car, something was already forming in my mind. A plan that would give Rain exactly what she'd asked for and teach all of us what that actually meant. But as I walked to my car, something was already forming in my mind. A plan that would give Rain exactly what she'd asked for and teach all of us what that actually meant. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is call someone's bluff by not bluffing back. The drive home from Rain's apartment was a blur. I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, replaying every word of that conversation. But one phrase kept echoing in my head. Stay out of my life. Fine. If that's what she wanted, that's exactly what she'd get. Most parents, when their adult children say hurtful things, try to fix it immediately. They call, they text, they show up with apologies and explanations and attempts to smooth things over. But I'm a surgeon. I understand that sometimes healing requires cutting away what's infected, even when it hurts. That night, I did something I'd never done in 24 years of being Rain's mother. I made a list of everything I did for her that she didn't know about. Not to use against her, but to understand what staying out of her life would actually look like. The list was longer than I expected. Car insurance, $180 per month. Phone plan, $85 per month. Health insurance, $340 per month. Student loan payments, $450 per month. Credit card. I'd been paying to build her credit, $200 per month. Art studio rental. I'd been covering anonymously, $800 per month. Emergency credit card for her, just in case. $150, average monthly balance. That was over $200 per month, $26,000 a year. Money I'd been providing without her knowledge, because I wanted her to feel independent while still being supported. But that wasn't even the full picture. There were the random transfers when her bank account got low, the insurance deductibles I'd paid when she had that car accident last year, the art supplies I'd been having delivered to her studio with anonymous gift cards. I'd been subsidizing her independence while she accused me of controlling her life. The irony was almost funny. Almost. Over the next 3 days, I did something that went against every maternal instinct I'd developed over 2 decades. I started methodically removing myself from my daughter's life. First, I called my insurance agent. I need to remove my daughter from my auto and health insurance policies, effective immediately. Dr. Mitchell, are you sure? She'll lose coverage at midnight on the day this processes. I'm sure. Next, I called the phone company. I need to cancel the line for Rain Mitchell on my family plan. That will disconnect her service immediately. Would you like to transfer the number to her own account? No, cancel it completely. Then came the harder calls. The art studio landlord, who knew me as R. Valencia. The anonymous benefactor who'd been paying for Rain's studio space for 8 months. I need to terminate the rental agreement for Studio 4B, effective at the end of this month. But the lease is paid through next month already. Are you sure the tenant wants to give up the space? The tenant doesn't know I've been paying for it. They'll figure it out soon enough. Each call felt like cutting away a piece of myself. But this wasn't about punishment. This was about truth. If Rain wanted to be independent, she needed to understand what independence actually cost. The credit cards were next. I canceled the emergency card and removed myself as a co-signer on her regular card. Then I called the student loan company and removed the automatic payment from my account. By Friday, I had systematically dismantled every safety net I'd built around my daughter's life. She wanted me out. I was out completely, but I wasn't finished. Saturday morning, I called my attorney, Marcus Whitfield. I need to update my will and all my beneficiary information. What kind of changes are we talking about? I'm removing my daughter as beneficiary from everything. Life insurance, retirement accounts, the house, my practice. Everything goes to medical charities now. There was a pause. Valencia, that's a pretty drastic change. Are you sure you want to do this? Maybe you should think about it for a few weeks. I've thought about it. My daughter wants independence from me. This is what independence looks like. Marcus had known me for years, handled my divorce, helped me set up my practice. He'd seen me fight for Rain's custody, watched me build a life designed entirely around protecting her future. Can I ask what happened? She asked me to stay out of her life. I'm honoring that request completely. The legal changes took the entire week to process. During that time, Rain didn't call. She didn't text. She didn't reach out at all, which told me everything I needed to know about how serious she was about cutting me out. But the hardest part was still coming. The following weekend, I drove to the storage unit I'd been renting for 3 years. Inside were boxes of things I'd been collecting for Rain's future. Artwork from her childhood, photo albums I'd been organizing, furniture I'd been saving for when she had her own place. And in the very back, wrapped carefully in protective cloth, was the reason I'd been working so many extra shifts and saying no to my own social life. A deed to a small building in the Pearl District. The building I'd been planning to surprise her with for her 25th birthday. Her own art gallery. I'd found the property 2 years ago, a former print shop with huge windows and exposed brick walls, perfect for displaying art. The previous owner was an elderly man who'd been looking for someone who understood what the space meant to artists. When I told him it was for my daughter, he'd agreed to an owner-financed deal that had been stretching my budget for 24 months. The plan had been to present her with the keys and say, "Now you can show the world what you're capable of." Instead, I called my realtor and put it on the market. "Are you sure about this, Valencia? This place is perfect for an art gallery. You've put so much work into it." "I'm sure. I need it sold as quickly as possible." "Can I ask why?" "Because I bought it for someone who doesn't want anything from me." The really radical part came next. If I was going to stay out of Rain's life completely, I needed to stay out of Portland completely. Because in a city this size, we'd inevitably run into each other, and running into each other would mean the possibility of reconciliation before the lesson was learned. I called Dr. Sarah Chen, my department head at the hospital. "I want to know about opportunities with Doctors Without Borders, something international, something long-term." "Valencia, this is sudden. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. I just think it's time for a change." She was quiet for a moment. "You know, there's a position opening up in Guatemala. Children's clinic in a rural area that needs a pediatric surgeon. It's a minimum 2-year commitment, very basic conditions, but incredibly meaningful work." "How soon could I start?" "They need someone immediately. But Valencia, this would mean leaving your practice, your life here. Are you sure this is what you want?" Was I sure? I was giving up everything I'd built in Portland. My successful practice, my beautiful house, my entire life. But what was the point of having a life if the person who made it meaningful didn't want to be part of it? "I'm sure." The next 2 weeks were a blur of paperwork, medical exams, and arrangements. I sold my house to the first buyer who made a reasonable offer. I transferred my patients to other surgeons in the practice. I donated most of my furniture to charity and put the few things that mattered into storage. The hardest part was explaining to my sister Juniper what I was doing. "You're leaving the country because you had a fight with Rain? Valencia, this is insane." "It's not insane, it's what she asked for. She didn't ask you to leave the country. She asked me to stay out of her life. How can I stay out of her life if I'm in the same city, the same state, the same time zone? If she wants independence, she's going to get complete independence. What if she changes her mind? What if she wants to apologize? Then she'll have to figure out how to do that without me making it easy for her." Juniper stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "You're punishing her." "No, I'm teaching her. There's a difference." But was there? Even I wasn't entirely sure anymore. Was this about giving Rain what she'd asked for, or was this about showing her what life looked like without me? Was this love, or was this revenge disguised as a lesson? Maybe it was both. 3 days before my flight to Guatemala, I did one final thing. I wrote a letter to Rain and left it with Juniper, with instructions not to give it to her unless she asked for it. The letter explained everything: the financial support, the gallery I'd bought for her, the sacrifices I'd made, and the choice I was making now. But more than that, it explained why. I realize now that loving you meant trying to control outcomes instead of trusting you to create your own. I realize that protecting you meant protecting myself from the fear of losing you. You asked me to stay out of your life, and I'm going to honor that completely. When you're ready to have a relationship with me, if you're ever ready, it will have to be a relationship between 2 independent adults, not between a mother who gives everything and a daughter who feels suffocated by the weight of that giving. I signed it, sealed it, and handed it to Juniper with shaking hands. 2 days later, I was on a plane to Guatemala City, carrying nothing but 2 suitcases and the hope that sometimes the only way to save someone you love is to disappear completely and let them discover who they are without you. What I didn't know was that my disappearance would trigger a series of events that would teach both Rain and me what we'd actually lost and what we might still be able to find. What I didn't know was that my disappearance would trigger a series of events that would teach both Rain and me what we'd actually lost and what we might still be able to find. But first, my daughter had to learn what independence actually costs when the safety net disappears without warning. I'd been in Guatemala for 6 weeks when Juniper called me on the clinic's satellite phone. It was 3 a.m. Portland time, which meant something was very wrong. "Valencia, I think you need to know what's happening with Rain." My heart stopped. "Is she hurt?" "Not physically, but her life is falling apart, and she has no idea why." From my small room in the clinic, surrounded by the sounds of the Guatemalan jungle, I listened to my sister describe the systematic collapse of everything I'd been quietly supporting. It started with her phone. Rain woke up one Tuesday morning to find her service disconnected. When she called the phone company, they told her the account had been canceled by the primary account holder. She assumed it was a mistake, tried to get her own plan, and discovered that without credit history, real credit history, not the artificial credit I'd been building for her, she'd need a deposit she couldn't afford. Then her car insurance lapsed. She found out when she got pulled over for a minor traffic violation, and the officer informed her that her insurance had been canceled for non-payment. The ticket turned into an impounded car because driving without insurance in Oregon is a criminal offense. She had to call Phoenix's mom to come pick her up from the police station, Juniper told me. She was humiliated. The humiliation was just beginning. 2 weeks later, she went to her art studio to find the locks changed. A notice on the door explained that the space was available for rent due to non-payment. Rain stood in that hallway, staring at 8 months of her artwork locked behind a door she couldn't open, with no idea who had been paying for the space she'd thought Phoenix was covering. That same week, her health insurance was canceled. She discovered this during a routine doctor's appointment when the receptionist informed her that her coverage had been terminated. A simple checkup turned into a $400 bill she couldn't pay. But the real crisis came when her student loan payment bounced. She got a call from the loan company, Juniper continued. They told her that the automatic payments had stopped and she was now 30 days past due. "Valencia, she had no idea you were making those payments. She thought they were automatically being deducted from her account." The late fees alone were $150. The total amount due was $450. Money Rain didn't have and had no idea how to get. Phoenix tried to help, but a coffee shop barista can't suddenly take on an extra $2,200 per month in expenses. Their relationship started showing strain when every conversation became about money, stress, and problems neither of them knew how to solve. And Camden, the father she'd chosen over me? He disappeared again, Juniper said quietly. The minute Rain called him asking for help with her financial crisis, he said he was going through his own transition and couldn't take on additional stress right now. He literally told her that her problems were too much for him to handle. History repeating itself exactly as I'd predicted. But I felt no satisfaction in being right. Only heartbreak for my daughter learning the same lesson about Camden that I'd learned 16 years too late. "She tried to call you," Juniper continued, "multiple times, but your number's been disconnected." I'd changed my phone number before leaving the country. Clean break, no chance for impulsive contact that would undermine what we were both learning. Then she came to your house, found it empty with a sold sign in the yard. She stood on your front porch crying, Valencia. She thought something terrible had happened to you. The image of Rain crying on my empty front porch nearly broke my resolve. But I forced myself to remember why I was doing this. Sometimes love means letting someone fall far enough to understand how much they need to stand on their own. "She finally came to me," Juniper said, "desperate, scared, asking if I knew where you were or what had happened. That's when I realized she genuinely had no idea about any of the support you'd been providing. The conversation that followed between Juniper and Rain changed everything. Juniper, bless her heart, didn't sugarcoat anything. She sat Rain down in her yoga studio and methodically went through every single way I'd been supporting her life without her knowledge. Your mother was paying for your car insurance, your phone, your health insurance, your student loans, and your art studio. She was also paying off a credit card you didn't even know you had to build your credit score. That's over $2,000 a month, Rain. $26,000 a year. But that wasn't the worst part. There's something else, Juniper had said, and I could hear the emotion in her voice as she told me about this conversation. Your mother bought you an art gallery. Rain didn't understand at first. What do you mean, bought me a gallery? I mean, she found a building in the Pearl District 2 years ago. Perfect space for an art gallery. She's been making payments on it for 24 months, working extra surgeries to afford it. She was going to give it to you for your 25th birthday. The silence stretched long enough that Juniper thought the call had dropped. Rain finally whispered. She sold it before she left for Guatemala. Put it on the market the day after your fight. That's when Rain broke. Completely, utterly broke. Because suddenly she understood that every accusation she'd made about me being controlling, every complaint about my interference in her life, had been happening while I was secretly funding the independence she thought she'd achieved on her own. But the story gets worse before it gets better. Phoenix, overwhelmed by the financial pressure and the constant drama, started pulling away. Their relationship couldn't survive the stress of real-world problems they weren't prepared for. Within a month of my departure, he'd moved out, telling Rain he needed space to figure things out, almost the exact words Camden had used when he left me. Rain found herself alone in an apartment she couldn't afford, with bills she couldn't pay, and no idea how to build a life without the safety net she'd never known existed. She tried everything, applied for jobs that would use her art degree, but discovered that the job market for artists is exactly as impractical as I'd always worried it would be. She took a job at a retail store, but minimum wage couldn't cover the expenses she'd never had to budget for before. The final blow came when she had to give up the apartment she'd shared with Phoenix. Without his income and without my secret support, she couldn't make rent. She ended up moving back in with my mother, Cordelia, sleeping in her childhood bedroom at 74-year-old grandmother's house because she had nowhere else to go. Cordelia, who had always criticized my parenting as too controlling, suddenly found herself dealing with a 24-year-old granddaughter who couldn't manage basic adult responsibilities because she'd never had to learn them. Your mother wasn't controlling you, Cordelia told Rain, according to Juniper. She was controlling the consequences of your choices so you could feel free to make them. There's a difference, and I'm just now understanding what it cost her to do that. 3 months after I'd left for Guatemala, Rain finally understood what I'd been trying to tell her for years. Independence isn't just about making your own choices. It's about being able to live with the consequences of those choices. And consequences, it turns out, are expensive. She wants to talk to you, Juniper finished. She's desperate to apologize, to understand why you left, to figure out how to fix this. What did you tell her? I told her that you're working in a clinic that barely has running water, serving children who don't have access to basic medical care because you decided that if your own daughter didn't want your help, you'd help children who did. And I told her that if she wants to talk to you, she needs to prove she's learned what independence actually means. Not just saying she's sorry, but showing she can build a life without expecting you to fix her problems. Did you give her the letter? Not yet. I'm waiting to see if she can figure out how to stand on her own first. Because if she can't, the letter won't mean anything. As I hung up the phone and walked back to my small room in the clinic, I realized that we were both learning the same lesson from opposite sides. Rain was learning what it cost to be truly independent, and I was learning what it cost to truly let go. But the hardest part of the lesson was still coming. because sometimes understanding what you've lost is only the first step toward figuring out how to build something better. But the hardest part of the lesson was still coming, because sometimes understanding what you've lost is only the first step toward figuring out how to build something better. And what happened next would test everything both Rain and I thought we knew about pride, forgiveness, and what it really means to love someone enough to let them grow. 6 months into my time in Guatemala, I was performing surgery on a 7-year-old boy named Miguel who'd been born with a heart defect. His mother, Rosa, had walked 12 miles through mountain villages to bring him to our clinic, carrying him the entire way because they had no transportation and no money for bus fare. As I worked to repair Miguel's tiny heart, I found myself thinking about Rain. Not the angry, accusatory daughter who'd told me to stay out of her life, but the 8-year-old who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, whispering that she was scared and needed me to keep her safe. When had keeping her safe become keeping her small? When had my love become a cage instead of wings? After Miguel's surgery was successful, Rosa grabbed my hands with tears streaming down her face. "Doctora, you gave my son a chance to live. How can I ever repay you?" I thought about all the surgeries I'd performed over the years, all the children I'd saved, all the families I'd helped, and I realized that the most important person I'd been trying to save, my own daughter, was the one I'd been failing to help, because I'd been trying to save her from the wrong things. I'd been trying to save her from making mistakes instead of teaching her how to recover from them. I'd been trying to save her from being hurt instead of teaching her how to heal. I'd been trying to save her from being abandoned instead of teaching her how to be whole on her own. That night, I wrote a letter to Juniper asking about Rain, not demanding information, not trying to orchestrate anything, just asking, like a person who cared about someone but respected their right to figure things out without interference. Juniper's response changed everything. "She's been working 3 jobs for 2 months, Juniper wrote. Retail in the mornings, tutoring kids in art after school, and doing freelance graphic design at night. She's exhausted, but she's determined to save enough money to get her own apartment again. She's also been going to financial literacy classes at the community college, learning about budgeting and credit and all the things she never had to think about before. But the most important part came next. She hasn't asked me for money, not once, even when her grandmother's car broke down and she had to walk 4 miles to work in the rain. Even when she got sick and couldn't afford to go to the doctor. She's learning what independence really costs, and she's paying that cost herself." 3 weeks later, Juniper called me with news that made my heart stop. "Rain bought a plane ticket to Guatemala. She's coming to see you." "What? How did she even find out where I am?" "She hired a private investigator, used money from her tutoring job. She said if she was going to apologize to you, she needed to do it face to face, and she needed to prove she could solve her own problems to get there." The idea of Rain traveling to rural Guatemala by herself terrified every protective instinct I'd ever developed. But it also filled me with a pride I'd never felt before. My daughter was coming to find me, not because she needed me to fix her life, but because she'd fixed enough of it herself to know what she wanted to say. She arrived on a Tuesday morning, stepping off a dusty bus in the village where our clinic was located, looking thin and tired and absolutely beautiful. She was carrying a worn backpack and wearing clothes I didn't recognize, practical, inexpensive clothes that she'd clearly bought for function rather than fashion. When she saw me standing outside the clinic, we both froze. 8 months of separation, 8 months of hurt and growth and learning, all compressed into that moment of recognition. Then she started walking toward me, and I could see in her eyes that this wasn't the same girl who'd screamed at me to stay out of her life. This was a woman who'd learned what it meant to stand on her own feet. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, baby." We didn't hug immediately. We just stood there looking at each other, both of us probably afraid to assume anything about where we stood or what was allowed between us now. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I'm sorry for the things I said, and I'm sorry for the things I didn't understand, and I'm sorry it took me losing everything to realize what you'd been giving me." "I'm sorry too," I said. "I'm sorry I loved you so hard that it felt like pressure instead of support. I'm sorry I was so afraid of losing you that I almost guaranteed it would happen." That's when we both started crying, not the angry, frustrated tears of our last fight, but the cleansing tears of people who'd both learned something difficult and necessary about themselves. She stayed in Guatemala for a week. Not in the clinic. I arranged for her to stay with a local family so she could experience the village and understand the work I was doing. During the day, she helped with non-medical tasks at the clinic, organizing supplies and playing with the children who were waiting for treatment. But the real conversations happened in the evenings, walking through the village or sitting on the porch of the clinic under stars brighter than any we'd ever seen in Portland. "I never knew about the gallery," she said one night. "Juniper told me you bought me a building. I wanted to give you a place where you could show the world what you're capable of, but I realize now that you don't need me to give you that place. You need to build it yourself so you know it's really yours." "I want to earn it," she said. "I want to earn the right to have something like that, not because you think I deserve it, but because I've proven to myself that I can handle the responsibility." We talked about Camden, about his second disappearance and how it had hurt her but not destroyed her the way it might have when she was younger. "I understand now why you were so afraid of me getting close to him," she said. "Not because you were trying to control me, but because you knew what it felt like to be abandoned and you were trying to protect me from that pain." "But you can survive that pain," I said. "You're stronger than I gave you credit for, stronger than I ever let you prove to yourself." "I'm strong because you made me strong. I just had to learn how to use that strength without your help." On her last night in Guatemala, she gave me a gift that nearly broke my heart in the best possible way. It was a small painting she'd created during her week in the village, a portrait of Miguel, the little boy I'd operated on, smiling and playing with the other children. "I wanted to paint something that showed what you do here," she said. "Not just the medical part, but the hope part, the way you give kids a chance to have a future. It's beautiful, Rain, really beautiful. I want to have an art show when I get back to Portland, not in some gallery you bought for me, but in a space I rent myself with money I earned myself, and I want to donate half the proceeds to your clinic here." That's when I knew we were going to be okay. Not the same way we'd been before, but better. Because now our relationship was based on choice instead of obligation, on respect instead of guilt, on two adults who cared about each other instead of a mother and child trapped in patterns neither of us had known how to change. When I walked her to the bus that would take her back to Guatemala City, we hugged like we meant it. Like people who'd chosen to love each other after learning they could survive without that love. "When are you coming home?" she asked. "When my commitment here is finished. Another 1.5 years. "Good. That'll give me time to build the kind of life I want you to be proud of. Not because you helped me create it, but because you raised me well enough that I could create it myself." 6 months later, Juniper sent me photos from Rain's first solo art exhibition. She'd rented space in a small gallery in southeast Portland, the same neighborhood where we'd had our final fight. The paintings were stunning, real, raw, emotional pieces that showed a depth and maturity I'd never seen in her work before. But the most beautiful part was the artist's statement she'd written for the show. "These paintings explore the space between love and freedom, protection and growth, holding on and letting go. They're dedicated to my mother, who loved me enough to disappear so I could discover who I am when I'm not afraid of disappointing her. She sold 6 paintings that night and donated exactly half the proceeds to the clinic in Guatemala, just as she'd promised. When I finally returned to Portland 18 months later, I came home to a daughter who owned her own small apartment, ran her own freelance design business, and had built the kind of independent life I'd always wanted for her, but had never known how to help her create. Our relationship now is nothing like it was before. It's better. We see each other because we want to, not because obligation or guilt or fear demands it. We give each other advice when it's asked for, support when it's needed, and space when it's required. And sometimes, when we're having dinner together in her little apartment that she pays for with money she earned herself, I look at this strong, capable, independent woman, and I think about how the best thing I ever did for her was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I loved her enough to let her go completely so she could choose to come back. I learned that there's a difference between giving up on someone and giving them the space to grow. There's a difference between abandoning someone and stepping back so they can step forward. And there's a difference between losing your child and setting them free to become the adult you always hoped they could be. My daughter told me to stay out of her life, so I did exactly what she wanted. But what we both discovered was that sometimes the only way to save a relationship is to be willing to lose it completely. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone you love is the chance to realize they don't need you, so they can choose to want you instead. Have you ever had to choose between holding on and letting go, between protecting someone and trusting them to protect themselves? Let me know in the comments, because sometimes the hardest lessons about love are the ones we learn by almost losing it completely.